What's going on, workforce? Brian here.
Chris here.
And there, yeah, all right, we'll just go with that. Today we're talking about actually kind of had an epiphany about Final Fantasy XIV and its sandbox style content, because one of the things you guys have seen, we were talking a little bit about it going into this week. I'm apparently making Chris laugh for the hell of it. I don't know, but we've been talking about it, and I had an epiphany that Final Fantasy XIV sandbox content is the most popular content in the game, and that's glamour, that's housing, that's RP in a way. And so when you look at the ways that people can be expressive and creative in Final Fantasy XIV, it ends up being a sandbox style content. And so I kind of had this realization, and I was like, why am I not engaging with it? I'm the sandbox guy. I talk about my love of a sandbox. Final Fantasy XI being my introduction to MMOs through Sandbox. And so I figured we'd sit down today, kind of discuss it, get Chris's like insight, because I kind of sprung this on him. I was like, hey, I want to talk about this. Are you game? He's like, sure. And then he laughs at me as I do the intro. But before we kind of dive into the main subject, guys, if you guys haven't seen our stream schedule, Monday through Friday, 8 a.m., Chris is live to 2 p.m. I'm usually hanging out with him in voice. And then I stream Monday, Thursday, and Sunday. So hopefully you come and check us out, 7 o'clock, 7:30. In the evenings, and then I randomly hop on early in the mornings to kind of knock out controller guides for Final Fantasy XIV. So that's kind of what I wanted to make sure you guys are aware of. But let's dive into the subject. Chris, I sprung this on you. You were kind of laughing at me. I want to know your
Yeah.
thoughts.
I mean, part of it is I'm choking down lunch between this because we record this right after my streams. So I'm usually in between recordings. I'm choking down a little food, and so he caught me mid bite there when he started it off. But I think it depends on your definition of popular. So I think
Yeah.
one of the weaknesses of World of Warcraft is as they got larger, one of the things that they quickly did to make sure that they weren't too insular and too in their own echo chamber is they tried to not just make the game they wanted to play, but make the game they thought that the community as a whole wanted to play. And one of the things they started to rely on is metrics. And on its own, that makes sense. But what that implies is every minute of game time, every tweet that it's about it, right? Every piece of engagement is equal. And so 1 minute of game time in raid versus 1 minute of game time with Glamour active are considered equal amounts of fun. And one of the things that got them into trouble was as they put grindy mechanics in, their equivalent of a Final Fantasy XIV relic grind, that implies that 15 runs of Delibram is fun just because 15 runs is the most efficient way to get that step completed. And for some people it might be, but because you've extracted something that somebody's wants and then held it kind of hostage, it's also possible that there are people who hate Delibram. And after the fourth run, they never want to touch it again. And there they are, 15 runs in, 30 runs in, 45 runs in, grinding relics resentfully. And so you have to be careful with how you define popular, because the sandbox content to imply that more people glamour, sure, but that doesn't mean that if something was cut from the game, if we had a choice of cutting 4-mans or cutting glamour, which one would lose more subscribers? I think that's harder to tell.
Yeah, I'm not thinking of it from the perspective of gaining subscribers. I'm just thinking of where people are the most passionate and why people kind of confer on the title Glamour is the true endgame, why housing is so popular. And I honestly, like, this is, again, my thought. You guys can let me know if I'm crazy, but it all comes down to it's the most player choice that we are given in the world of Final Fantasy. And somebody said this, and I think that this was kind of the starting point, and I apologize, I actually don't have this comment ready, so thank you so much for this comment, because it was insightful. It said, like, you can have player choice, you can have you can have great balance, and you can have a consistent and quality content. You can't have all three. Like, you got to pick two. And it's like in Square, and their argument was that Square Enix picked the right ones. Balanced content with very good consistency and quality. And I was like, yeah, I can't fault you for that. Like, when you get the content, it's exciting, and you see that, from a metrics perspective in your point of view. But then I just continue to think about it, because it's like, yeah, like, how interesting would it be? And then and once I kind of realized, like, that's the sandbox content that Final Fantasy XIV offers, then I started asking myself, why am I not engaged with it? Like, I like sandbox content. Why don't I engage with glamour? Which I say, like, I glamour, I don't care. Until we started researching the cowboy hat, and we're still looking into that for Ronso. Like there's some elements. I'm not going to sit here and say, like, like they should delete glamour in that regards. But I don't engage with it. I don't engage. We have a house. I never decorated a single inch of it. I let other people who were passionate about that design do. And I'm still kind of finishing getting over my cold here, guys. Forgive any kind of voice cracks. There's 2 right there. Just get a voice crack counter in chat, if you will. But and so then I think essentially for me, when I started really kind of like, I was like, there really isn't a sandbox battle content. Like there isn't that sandbox style content that has and engages the battle system in a way that I would prefer. And I answer the question saying, how freaking epic would it be if we saw the conquest system from Final Fantasy XI make its way? We've talked about it briefly, but I don't think it would be a direct port. I think you would have to look at how would you...
What makes sense?
You know, right. What makes sense for the world of Final Fantasy that doesn't break the game, that doesn't... Like, when we talk about some of the choices of things that we'd like to see tweaked, like, we honestly say, keep it out of Savage, keep it out of Ultimate. Like, have a piece of content and a system that exists for 99% of the players, but doesn't touch and ruin, or have the potential to ruin, the content that like a passionate base is concerned of. So we want to have respect to all viewpoints that are coming into this discussion, while at the same time saying, like, how cool would it be if there was something that was either passively going on behind the scenes or some form of sandbox style. As a player, I have choice, I have impact, I have agency that's not going to impact the story, that's not going to impact other players' decisions to play. And I think that's essentially what I feel is lacking, and when I look at what is offering, I think that's why people gravitate to it. They get hooked by the narrative, and then all of a sudden they have this great play space to play in. And the reason why that doesn't attract me is that I'm traditionally more into the leveling and EXP side of it. Like if you bring in a sandbox element that has XP attached to it, all of a sudden I'm a happy camper. Like I'm probably weird, but what do you think, Riz?
I think it really comes down to what is the purpose of this kind of sandbox content.
Yeah.
And I think it's filler. It's not meant to be the main course. And you know, like if you go to a gym, what are the majority of people doing at any one moment? Take a screenshot. They're standing around. They're taking a break. They're getting water. They're not working out at that exact moment.
They're visiting the pizza bar.
Exertion is a much smaller percentage of the total time you spend there.
Yeah.
When you go to a skate park, not everybody is actively doing a trick at every moment. The vast majority of people are standing around or just lightly skating. The minority of the time is the feature event. It's why when Ultimate gets cut, it hurts so bad. The majority of players don't touch it. They watch it at best, you know, and the people who attempt it, but many people don't get it clear, and the people who clear it do not necessarily clear it repeatedly. And so in total percentage of playtime, it's this tiny little thing. But it's what makes everything else worth it. Or we would just be playing a game where it is the feature content. We can go play Sims where it is the feature content. We can go play Minecraft where it's entirely sandbox. We can go do that, but we don't. We come to a game that has a core feature that everything's built around, and you can't just remove that just because it's not the majority. So I think a lot of the reason you're saying you don't engage is you probably engage more than you realize.
Okay.
You probably spend a lot of time just standing outside our house, and you like it. Just because you don't actively decorate it doesn't mean that the game wouldn't be a little bit worse because you didn't have our free company house, a place for us to gather, and a place that you looked at and there's a familiarity to it. It's your house. It's your free company's house, and it looks different. And yes, others are similar, but that one's yours. You know, when you get a mount that you really like, even if you roulette, every time that one comes up, it's kind of nice. You don't necessarily want that to be the only mount in the game. But I like the Namatsu mount is my favorite mount that I've gotten in the game, followed by the Fat Chocobo mount. I love those two mounts. Those aren't the only two in my roulette, but I like it when they pop up. And so I think, you know, they're meant to be window dressing, but they're important because they're window dressing. The game would be worse without them, but you can't just remove. And so, yes, they are what describes the majority of players because we all have them in common. Some people's end game is crafting. Some people's end game is acquiring all the glamours, not just one or two that they really like, but all of them. And some people's end game is doing the hardest battle content or PvP or some combination or whatever. But we all, you know, hey, I got an item that I really like. Look at how cool this is. Okay, we can all relate to that, even though, you know, you got that item from Heaven on High, and I don't even know what that is. I get that there's a really cool weapon behind it. And so I think it just acts as a communal piece of content. It's something that we can all relate to, even if we don't necessarily spend any time in G pose or explorer mode.
It's just it's so interesting for me, I think, to have that like kind of mindset. I was like, oh, and then to see like when we talk about it, when we hear these things, it's like it would always kind of frustrate me. But now I'm excited for it. I'm glad it exists, and I'm not frustrated by that. The Glamor is the true endgame mindset, because it's like, oh, that's great. That's how people can build in this game, and they have that freedom of expression, and that's why it is, I think, so valuable, because the game doesn't offer that in terms of like your character build. So what ends up being, how do you make yourself stand out and be unique?
Right.
And it's those sandbox style elements, and I think that's kind of like, oh, we kind of joke because I think we were talking about that maybe yesterday, where it's like when there's news and there's guides to be made, like that's when work to game is easy. You know, that's when it's like, hey, here's, there's a pathway. Like, here's what we're making. But the sandbox, the like, how do we like, what do we want to talk about, and how do we like kind of manage and drive through the valleys of when they're like, yeah, like there hasn't been an update, we haven't got news, like there isn't much to talk about, except for the fact that we believe that there's a ton of stuff to talk about, and it's about kind of finding that mindset. And so I'm actually like kind of tip of the hat to those who have found these systems, like put on plays, modified their houses to build elevators and do all these different things to kind of express themselves creatively within the space and the play space that exists in 14. And I think at the heart of it, like I'm hopeful more for 6.0, because especially when we kind of finish this narrative approach, we might start a new saga. We might have more chaptered kind of contained stories for a little while, which is, who knows, like I'm just excited more for the potential where 14's going from this point, from this expansion forward, because it kind of can say like, yep, that's a whole thing. Here's our new day. Here's our new start. And then I think narratively, and not to get too spoiler heavy, but when you think about it, we've all been facing kind of a common enemy. Like there's been a forced uniting factor in all of us. What happens when that goes away? What happens when the thing that we're like striving to prevent or to overcome is no longer there? And I think there's some truth that when you actually playing through AR now, experiencing like how bad are these people? Like how bad is Ulda? How bad is the Syndicate?
Like, our allies. Like a lot of people are like, oh, this is unforgivable. Oh, careful with the term unforgivable, because sometimes we have some pretty crappy choices.
Right.
They're all unforgivable.
I don't, I don't think we'll see like massive system overhaul changes, but I think essentially we could end up setting up a narrative where, okay, yeah, maybe there's not a big bad. Maybe it's just our own pettiness that we end up striving against to overcome, in that regards. Maybe like, we've been fighting over Mortona in the front lines for forever, like in a non-murdering capacity. Like, will we see like some kind of strife come back to the world itself? Will we be having to be choosing factions or passively doing different things? I don't know, but if nothing else, it has me really excited to see where the game goes, because I think essentially when you look at it, like it's exciting to see what systems we have, and I'm excited for more. And I think for me, if we can get some kind of play space that has more battle kind of content tied into it, I think that's essentially what I think would fill in that gap for me personally. Right. I'm not saying that, cut anything that exists, just that's the feedback that I'll be continuing to provide. But I feel like my voice is going. Any other thoughts, Chris? Yeah.
No, I think it really just is the content that unites us, but it can't stand on its own.
Yeah.
I think that we don't want the filler content to be the whole game, and so that's where the feeling of I'm insulted by Glamor is the true endgame is, because it does imply the fact that it's the true endgame, that any other endgame is false, implies that the game would stand without it, and I don't think it would. I think the structural foundation of the game, the MSQ and the battle content, is what's doing the load bearing, but we don't see it because we cover it with our player agency through aesthetics. We cover it with all of the time we spend on the 16 weeks of in between running optional things, getting our eye level higher than it needs to be, unlocking cosmetics we don't need like mounts and minions, having fun. That's what we see on the outside. Mm-hmm. And they can look structural. Brick on homes looks structural. It is not. That is not what holds your home up. And so I think that the Glamor being the true in-game means it is the true finish out. Mm-hmm. It just isn't what's actually doing the heavy lifting. And there's nothing wrong with the end user saying, you know what I feel I picked was the brick, because you don't pick how the studs are put together. Somebody else handled that for you, and that's what holds our game up. And will continue to hold our game up moving forward, however they decide to handle it in 6.1.
Yeah. Anyway, guys, I thought that was just kind of a fun thought that I wanted to kind of share with you guys, get Chris's insight. And as always, love to know your thoughts. So just sound off. Let me know what you're thinking. Do you hate also Glamor as the true end game, or are you a part of that ecosystem? Do you subscribe the title of Sandbox to any of the content that we shared? Is there a piece of content that we missed that you would also define as Sandbox that I didn't list? So just let me know, because I don't know, it's just kind of a fun space that I was kind of playing in, and I was like, let's talk about it. Anyway, guys, that's gonna wrap it up for this video. If you liked it, hit that like button. If you didn't, hit that dislike button. Any vote counts in this regard, so we appreciate your feedback. It keeps us informed as to what you guys are looking for more of here on the channel. But for Work to Game, my name's Brian.
My name's Chris.
Thanks so much for watching. We hope to see you on our next one, but until then,
take care.